The bitter wind howled across the empty plains of Wyoming Territory. 1878, as Hattie Thornton clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, peering into the growing darkness with weary eyes. She had nowhere to go, 2 hungry children depending on her, and a storm brewing on the horizon that threatened to swallow what little hope she had left. Hattie had been walking since dawn, her 4-year-old daughter Emma's small hand in hers, and 2-year-old James strapped to her back in a worn sling. The stagecoach that had carried them west had broken an axle 10 miles back, the driver promising to return with help, though Hattie held little faith in such assurances. Men made promises they couldn't keep. She'd learned that lesson well from her late husband. When the rain began to fall in icy sheets, Hattie spotted a weathered barn in the distance. With her last reserves of strength, she trudged toward it, praying it wasn't abandoned like everything else in this desolate stretch of land. "Just a little farther, sweet ones," she whispered, her voice nearly lost in the rising wind. Emma nodded bravely, her small face pinched with cold while James whimpered against her shoulder. The barn door creaked as Hattie pushed it open, relief washing over her as she found it empty of people but filled with fresh hay. At least they would have shelter for the night. She settled the children in a clean pile of hay, wrapping them in the only blanket she had carried from their old life in Boston. "Are we home now, Mama?" Emma asked, her blue eyes wide with innocence. Hattie stroked her daughter's golden curls. "Not yet, darling. But we're safe tonight, and tomorrow we'll find our way to Pine Creek. Uncle Thomas will be waiting for us." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Thomas had never answered her desperate letters, but she needed a destination to keep moving forward. As the children drifted to sleep, Hattie sat guard at the barn entrance, watching the storm rage. Exhaustion eventually claimed her, and she slumped against the wooden post, surrendering to a fitful sleep filled with memories of the husband who had gambled away their home and then died, leaving her with nothing but debts and hungry children. She didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats or the barn door swinging open hours later. She didn't see the tall figure silhouetted against the moonlight that had broken through the clouds. She only woke when a deep voice cut through her dreams. "Well now, what do we have here?" Hattie jerked awake, terror seizing her heart as she scrambled to position herself between the stranger and her sleeping children. "Please," she gasped, "we meant no harm. The storm, we only needed shelter for the night." The man stepped closer, and moonlight revealed a face weathered by sun and wind, with piercing blue eyes that assessed her carefully. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in worn riding clothes with a gun belt at his hip and a Stetson pulled low over his brow. "This is my property, madam," he said, his voice low and measured. "These your little ones?" Hattie nodded, her throat tight with fear. "We'll be gone by morning, I promise." The man crouched down to look at the sleeping children, his expression softening. "Can't let you wander off in this weather, not with young uns." He straightened, seeming to come to a decision. "I'm Brock Sullivan. My cabin's just over the ridge. It's warm and I've got food." "We don't need charity," Hattie said stiffly, though her stomach clenched with hunger. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "It's not charity to help a neighbor in need. That's just being human." He moved toward the children, and before Hattie could protest, he had gently scooped James into one arm and Emma into the other. "My name is Hattie Thornton," she said, following him reluctantly into the night. "And those are my children, Emma and James." Brock nodded, walking carefully with his precious cargo. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Thornton, though I wish it were under better circumstances." "Miss," Hattie corrected automatically. "My husband is gone." Brock gave her a long look but said nothing as they approached a sturdy log cabin nestled against a stand of pine trees. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the warm glow of lamplight spilled from the windows. It looked like a painting of home, one Hattie had imagined many times during their long journey west. Inside, Brock laid the children on a narrow bed tucked in the corner of the main room. They barely stirred, exhausted from their ordeal. The cabin was simple but clean, with a pot-bellied stove radiating heat, a wooden table with 4 chairs, shelves lined with books, and a few handmade furnishings. "Sit," Brock said, gesturing to the table. "You look about ready to collapse." Hattie wanted to argue to maintain some dignity, but her legs betrayed her, and she sank into the offered chair. Brock moved with surprising grace for such a large man, ladling stew from a pot on the stove into a bowl, which he placed before her along with a chunk of bread. "Eat," he said simply. "Then we'll talk." The first spoonful nearly brought tears to her eyes, rich, savory, and the first hot meal she'd had in days. She ate slowly, trying to maintain her manners despite her hunger. Brock sat across from her, nursing a cup of coffee, his blue eyes studying her with quiet intensity. "Where you headed, Miss Thornton?" "Pine Creek," she answered. "My husband's brother lives there, or at least he did." "That's 40 miles northeast," Brock said. "Were you planning to walk the whole way?" Heat flushed Hattie's cheeks. "The stagecoach broke down. The driver said he'd return with help, but—" "Wilson abandoned you," Brock stated flatly. "He's known for that when there's trouble, especially with a storm coming. You know him. This territory doesn't have many people. We tend to know each other, or at least know of each other." He paused. "I've never heard of any Thorntons in Pine Creek." Hattie's spoon clattered against the bowl. "My brother-in-law moved there recently. After the war." She lifted her chin. "We've had no contact for some time, but he's our only family now." Brock's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes told Hattie he didn't believe her. Still, he didn't press further. "You and your children can stay here tonight. Tomorrow, if the weather clears, I'll take you to town. It's 15 miles, but I've got a wagon." "That's very kind, but it's not kindness, Miss Thornton. It's basic decency. I wouldn't leave a dog out in this weather, let alone a woman and 2 small children." Hattie wanted to protest, to maintain the independence that had sustained her through the darkest days after Richard's death, but practicality won out. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. We'll be out of your way as soon as possible." "Brock," he corrected, "and there's no rush. Winter's coming early this year." He stood, collecting her empty bowl. "You can take the bed with your children. I'll sleep by the fire." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," he said firmly. "You need proper rest. Those little ones need their mother at full strength." Too exhausted to argue further, Hattie nodded. She checked on the children, who slept peacefully, then slipped into the narrow space beside them, fully clothed. The last thing she saw before surrendering to sleep was Brock settling into a chair by the fire, his strong profile outlined by the dancing flames. Morning arrived with pale sunlight streaming through the cabin windows. Hattie woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until Emma's warm body shifted against her side. The events of the previous night came rushing back, and she sat up quickly, looking around the cabin. Brock stood at the stove, his back to her, quietly preparing what smelled like coffee and frying bacon. James was already awake, sitting at the table in a chair that had been modified with some books to raise him to the proper height. The toddler was contentedly eating a piece of bread slathered with what looked like honey. "Good morning," Brock said without turning. "Hope you don't mind. The boy woke early and he was hungry." Hattie slipped from the bed, smoothing her rumpled dress. "You didn't have to feed him." Seemed the natural thing to do. Brock turned, sliding a plate of bacon onto the table. "There's coffee if you want it, and I can fry some eggs for you and the girl when she wakes." As if on cue, Emma stirred, her blonde curls tousled from sleep. She blinked owlishly at the unfamiliar surroundings, then spotted her brother. "Jamie!" she exclaimed, scrambling from the bed to join him at the table. "Good morning, little miss," Brock said, offering her a gentle smile. "Would you like some breakfast?" Emma looked to her mother for permission. At Hattie's nod, she smiled shyly at Brock. "Yes, please, I'm very hungry." "Growing girls usually are," he replied, cracking eggs into the hot pan. Hattie approached the table cautiously, accepting the cup of coffee Brock offered. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Sullivan Brock," she corrected herself. "But we've imposed enough. If you could direct us toward town, we'll be on our way." Brock's expression darkened as he glanced toward the window. "Storm's not done with us yet. Look there." Hattie followed his gaze and felt her heart sink. The morning sunlight had been deceptive. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, and even as she watched, the first snowflakes began to fall. "First snow of the season," Brock commented. "Usually holds off until November, but this year's different." He placed a plate of eggs before Emma, who attacked them hungrily. "You won't make it to town today, Miss Thornton. Roads will be impassable before noon." "We can't stay here," Hattie protested weakly. "You can and you will," Brock replied, the same words he'd used the night before, but gentler now. "At least until the storm passes. I won't have your deaths on my conscience." Hattie wanted to argue but couldn't deny the logic of his words. She sank into a chair, accepting the plate of food he offered. "Mama, is this our new home?" Emma asked, her mouth full of eggs. "No, sweetheart. We're just guests until the storm passes. Then we'll continue to Uncle Thomas's house." Brock raised an eyebrow but said nothing as he joined them at the table. "I need to check on the livestock after breakfast. The barn needs reinforcing before the snow gets heavy." "We can help," Hattie offered quickly. "It's the least we can do. The children can stay inside where it's warm." "But I wouldn't turn down an extra pair of hands." He studied her for a moment. "Though those aren't working hands, Miss Thornton." Hattie glanced down at her palms, soft and uncalloused despite the hardships of recent months. "I'm stronger than I look." A ghost of a smile touched Brock's lips. "I don't doubt that. You'd have to be to get this far with two little ones." After breakfast, Hattie bundled the children in front of the fire with some wooden toys Brock produced from a chest, then followed him outside. The snow was falling more heavily now, blanketing the ground in white. The barn stood 100 yards from the cabin, and two horses nickered in greeting as they entered. "Beautiful animals," Hattie commented, reaching out to stroke the nose of a chestnut mare. "That's Penny," Brock said. "Gentlest horse I've ever owned. The bay gelding is Thunder. He's got more spirit, but he's dependable in a pinch." They worked together for the next hour, Brock showing Hattie how to stack hay bales against the walls to insulate the barn. She was determined to pull her weight, ignoring the growing blisters on her hands as she hefted the heavy bales. "You never said what brought you west," Brock commented as they worked. "It's a hard journey, especially with young children." Hattie hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. "My husband died 6 months ago. There was nothing left for us in Boston. I'm sorry for your loss." "Don't be," Hattie replied, more sharply than she intended. At Brock's surprised look, she sighed. "Richard wasn't a good husband or a good father. He drank and gambled, and when he died, he left us with nothing but debts. I sold everything to pay what I could and to buy passage west. And this brother in Pine Creek, he knows you're coming." Hattie focused on adjusting a hay bale. "Thomas and Richard weren't close, but he's family. He'll help us. He has to." Brock seemed about to say something, then thought better of it. "Let's get the horses fed, then head back to the cabin." "Your hands are bleeding." Hattie looked down, surprised to see red smears on the hay. "It's nothing, just blisters." "It's not nothing," Brock said firmly. "Come on." Back at the cabin, the children were still playing contentedly by the fire. Brock motioned for Hattie to sit at the table, then fetched a basin of water and some clean cloths. "You don't have to," Hattie began. "Let me help," Brock interrupted, taking her hands in his much larger ones. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he cleaned the dirt and blood from her palms. "You've got grit, Miss Thornton. Most city women would be wailing over these blisters." "I stopped being a city woman the day Richard died," Hattie said quietly. "And please call me Hattie." Brock nodded, applying a salve to her hands that smelled of herbs and honey. "My mother taught me about healing plants. This will help with the pain and prevent infection." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Brock agreed. "Lost her to consumption 5 years ago. My father followed a year later. This land's been in our family since before the war." "You've been alone all this time." Something flickered in Brock's eyes. "I manage well enough." The day passed quietly as the storm intensified. Brock taught Emma how to play checkers, displaying a patience Hattie wouldn't have expected from such a rugged man. James toddled between them, occasionally climbing into Brock's lap as if he'd known him forever. Hattie watched, a strange ache in her chest at how naturally Brock interacted with her children. By evening, the snow was falling so heavily that the world outside the windows had disappeared into white. Brock stoked the fire higher and prepared a simple dinner of beans, cornbread, and the last of the bacon. "Will Santa Claus find us here?" Emma asked suddenly as they ate. Hattie froze, realizing with a pang that Christmas was only a month away. Another promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "Of course he will, darling. Santa has a map of all the good children," Brock added seriously. "No matter where they are." Emma nodded, satisfied with this explanation, but Hattie avoided Brock's gaze, ashamed of the uncertainty that shadowed her future and her children's. After dinner, when the children were settled in bed, Brock offered Hattie a cup of whiskey. She hesitated, then accepted, letting the liquor warm her from the inside. "The storm might last several days," Brock said, gazing into the fire. "These early winter blizzards can be stubborn." Hattie nodded, trying to hide her dismay. "We'll find a way to compensate you for your hospitality once we reach Pine Creek." Brock's jaw tightened. "I don't want your money, Hattie." "Then what do you want?" she asked, suddenly wary. His blue eyes met hers directly. "The truth might be a good start." Hattie's hand trembled, nearly spilling her whiskey. "What do you mean?" "There's no Thomas Thornton in Pine Creek. Never has been, far as I know. And I know most everyone in a 50-mile radius." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the howling wind outside. Finally, Hattie set down her cup. "How long have you known?" "Suspected from the beginning. Confirmed it when you mentioned Pine Creek. I've got friends there." Hattie swallowed hard. "Are you going to turn us out?" Brock looked genuinely shocked. "What kind of man do you take me for? I'd never endanger you or those children, no matter what your story is." He leaned forward. "But I'd like to know who I'm sheltering under my roof." The dam broke, and words poured from Hattie like a river. She told him everything about Richard's gambling debts, about the men who'd come looking for payment after his death, threatening her and the children. About selling their home to pay what she could, but it wasn't enough. About fleeing west with what little money remained, constantly looking over her shoulder. "I made up the story about Thomas because I needed a destination," she admitted. "I thought if I could get far enough away, start fresh somewhere new, we might have a chance." When she finished, Brock was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the firelight. Finally, he spoke. "Those men, they followed you." "I don't know," Hattie whispered. "I've been careful, used different names at times, but they're the type who don't forget a debt." "What were you planning to do when you reached Pine Creek?" Hattie shrugged helplessly. Find work. A boarding house, perhaps, or a shop that needed help. I can sew well enough and I'm a quick learner. Brock leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. Winter's no time to be searching for work, especially with young ones depending on you. Pine Creek's a small town, opportunities are limited even in good weather. I have no choice, Hattie said, lifting her chin. We can't stay here indefinitely. Why not? The question hung in the air between them, startling in its simplicity. What? Why not stay here, at least until spring, Brock clarified. The cabin's small, but we could make it work. I could use help with the place, and you need somewhere safe for your children. Hattie stared at him, searching for some hidden motive in his expression, but found only sincerity. You do that for strangers. You're not strangers anymore, Brock said quietly, and I've been alone a long time. Too long, maybe. He stood abruptly, as if embarrassed by the admission. Think about it. No need to decide tonight. As he turned to bank the fire for the night, Hattie watched him, this quiet, strong man who had opened his home to them without question. For the first time since Richard's death, she felt a flicker of hope and something else she wasn't ready to name. The blizzard raged for 3 more days, trapping them in the cozy confines of the cabin. Despite the close quarters, they developed a surprisingly comfortable routine. Brock would rise first, stoke the fire, and start breakfast before venturing out to care for the livestock. Hattie would wake the children, dress them, and help with whatever tasks needed doing inside, mending Brock's clothes, organizing his surprisingly extensive library, or preparing meals from his well-stocked pantry. In the afternoons when James napped, Brock would teach Emma simple card games or show her how to whittle small wooden animals. The little girl blossomed under his attention, following him around the cabin like a shadow whenever possible. Even more surprising was James's attachment to the tall cowboy. The normally shy toddler would reach for Brock whenever he entered the room, gurgling happily when lifted into those strong arms. On the 4th morning, Hattie woke to sunlight streaming through the windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine white landscape that sparkled under the clear blue sky. She found Brock outside, clearing a path from the cabin to the barn. "Beautiful day," she commented, pulling her borrowed shawl tighter around her shoulders. Brock paused, leaning on his shovel. Snowflakes clung to his dark hair and beard, catching the sunlight like tiny diamonds. First clear day after a storm is always special, like the world's been made new. "The road to town will be passable soon," Hattie said, not sure why the thought filled her with such reluctance. "A few days yet," Brock replied. "Snow's deep, and the wagon won't manage until some of it melts." He hesitated. "Have you thought about my offer?" Hattie had thought of little else during the long nights, lying awake beside her sleeping children. "It's generous, but I can't impose on you that way." "It's not an imposition if it's mutual benefit," Brock argued. "You need shelter, I need help around the place. Seems straightforward enough." "People will talk," Hattie said softly. "A widow living with an unmarried man." Brock's expression turned serious. "We're 20 miles from the nearest neighbor, Hattie, but if it bothers you, I could sleep in the barn." "No," the vehemence in her voice surprised them both. "I didn't mean, that is." She took a breath. "I'm just concerned about propriety." "Propriety doesn't keep you warm or fed," Brock pointed out. "But I understand your concern. When we go into town, we can tell folks you're my widowed cousin, come to help after your husband's passing. No one would question it." The solution was so simple, so practical that Hattie couldn't find a reasonable objection. "You've thought this through?" Brock shrugged, returning to his shoveling. "I've had little else to do these past days but think." "And what have you been thinking about, Mr. Sullivan?" The question slipped out before Hattie could stop it, more flirtatious than she'd intended. Brock looked up, his blue eyes intense. about how different this place feels with you and the children here, about how quiet it was before without me even realizing it. The honesty in his voice stole Hattie's breath. Before she could respond, Emma's voice called from the doorway. "Mama, Brock, Jamie's trying to eat a book." The moment broken, Hattie turned toward the cabin. "I should go," Brock said with a smile. "We'll talk more later." That evening, after the children were asleep, Hattie joined Brock by the fire. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the flames dance. "I've decided to accept your offer," Hattie said finally, "at least until spring. But I insist on contributing. I won't be a charity case." "Never thought you were," Brock replied. "I was thinking you could help with the spring planting. I've got good acreage that's gone unused because I couldn't manage it alone. With your help, we could expand the vegetable garden, maybe even plant some wheat." "I don't know the first thing about farming," Hattie admitted. "I'll teach you. You're a quick study, I can tell." He hesitated. "And in return, maybe you could teach me some of those fancy Boston manners. Been a while since I've had cause to be civilized." Hattie laughed, the sound startling in its freedom. "I think you're more civilized than most of the gentlemen I knew in Boston." A week later, with the snow partially melted, Brock harnessed Thunder and Penny to the wagon for the journey into town. The children were excited about the adventure, bundled in extra blankets against the winter chill. Hattie wore a dress Brock had found in a trunk. It had belonged to his mother, he explained, and though it was a touch old-fashioned, it fit well enough after Hattie's skilled alterations. Pine Creek proved to be little more than a wide spot in the road: a general store, a small church, a saloon, and a smattering of houses clustered around a central square. Still, after weeks of isolation, it seemed bustling to Hattie. She felt eyes on them as Brock helped her and the children down from the wagon in front of the general store. Brock Sullivan, a portly man, called from the store's entrance. "Haven't seen you in a month of Sundays. Thought maybe the wolves got you." "Takes more than wolves to finish me off, George," Brock replied good-naturedly. "Been busy getting the place ready for winter, and then the storm hit." He gestured to Hattie and the children. "This is my cousin Hattie Thornton and her little ones, Emma and James. They'll be staying with me for a spell. Hattie, this is George Peterson. He owns the store and knows everyone's business." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Thornton," George said, tipping his hat. "Sorry to hear about your loss." Hattie nodded, playing along with the story they'd agreed upon. "Thank you. Brock has been kind enough to offer us shelter until we get back on our feet." "Always said he had a good heart, that one," George approved, "though he keeps to himself too much. Do you all good to have some company up at that cabin? Come on in and tell me what you need." "First round of supplies is on the house. Welcome to Pine Creek." As they followed George inside, Brock leaned close to whisper in Hattie's ear. "See, nothing to worry about." The store was a treasure trove of necessities and small luxuries. While Brock discussed feed prices with George, Hattie wandered the aisles with the children, making mental notes of things they might need. She was examining a bolt of sturdy cotton when a woman's voice interrupted her thoughts. "You must be Brock Sullivan's cousin." Hattie turned to find a handsome woman in her 30s watching her with undisguised curiosity. Her dress was finer than most in the store, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone used to attention. "Yes, I'm Hattie Thornton," she replied, extending her hand. "Beatrice Whitman," the woman said, her grip firm. "My husband owns the saloon. Word travels fast in Pine Creek." Her gaze swept over Hattie assessingly. "I didn't know Brock had family back east. We've been out of touch for some time," Hattie said smoothly. "After my husband died, I wrote to Brock, and he generously offered us a place to stay." "How fortunate for you," Beatrice murmured. "Brock has one of the most prosperous homesteads in the territory, even if he is something of a hermit." She glanced toward where Brock was helping James examine a wooden toy horse. "I've tried to draw him out for years, invite him to social gatherings, but he always declines." There was something in her tone that made Hattie wonder if Beatrice's interest in Brock had been more than neighborly. The thought sent an unexpected pang of jealousy through her. "Perhaps he simply prefers his own company," Hattie suggested. Beatrice's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Perhaps, or perhaps he was waiting for the right company." She smoothed her skirts. "Well, I should be going. Do stop by the saloon before you leave town. My husband would love to meet Brock's cousin." As Beatrice swept away, Hattie felt a presence at her shoulder. Brock stood there, his expression unreadable. "I see you've met Mrs. Whitman," he said quietly. "Yes, she seems interested in your welfare." A corner of Brock's mouth quirked up. "Beatrice has been trying to marry me off to various widows and spinsters for years. Thinks it's a crime for a man with good land to live alone. And you've resisted her matchmaking efforts." "Never met a woman worth changing my ways for," Brock said simply. "Until recently, perhaps." Before Hattie could respond to this startling statement, Emma tugged at her skirt, asking for permission to look at a display of hair ribbons. The moment passed, but Hattie felt its significance lingering between them as they completed their shopping. As winter settled in, the cabin that had once seemed small grew into a home. Brock built a partition to create a private sleeping area for Hattie and the children, using lumber he'd been saving for a planned expansion. They established routines and traditions, reading aloud in the evenings, Sunday dinners that were more elaborate than their usual fare, star-gazing on clear nights when Brock would point out constellations to an enraptured Emma. December brought preparations for Christmas. Brock cut down a small pine tree, which they decorated with popcorn strings and paper ornaments crafted at the table during long winter evenings. Hattie secretly worked on gifts: a new shirt for Brock sewn from fabric purchased in town, small rag dolls for Emma, and a stuffed horse for James. Brock disappeared into his workshop behind the barn for hours at a time, refusing to let anyone see what he was creating. On Christmas Eve, after the children were asleep, Brock and Hattie sat by the fire, sharing the last of a bottle of wine he'd been saving for a special occasion. "I haven't had a real Christmas since my parents died," Brock admitted. "Didn't seem worth the effort just for myself." "The children are so excited," Hattie said. "Emma's been asking every day if tomorrow is Christmas yet." She's never had much to look forward to on holidays. Richard wasn't one for celebrations. Brock's expression darkened, as it always did at the mention of her late husband. "Sounds like he was a fool in more ways than one." "He was," Hattie agreed. "But if he hadn't been, I might never have found my way here." She looked around the cabin at the decorations that transformed the rustic space into something magical. "I never expected to feel at home again." "Are you?" Brock asked softly. "At home, I mean." Hattie met his gaze, no longer afraid of what she saw there or what he might see in hers. "Yes," she whispered. "More than I've ever been." Brock set down his glass and moved to kneel beside her chair. "Hattie, I've been wanting to say something for weeks now, but I didn't want to rush you or make you feel obligated because of your situation." Hattie's heart thundered in her chest. "Say it now." "I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "With you and those children. I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Tears welled in Hattie's eyes. "Brock, you don't have to say anything back," he hurried on. "I just wanted you to know. And to tell you that whatever happens when spring comes, whether you stay or go, you've changed me. Made me remember what it's like to have something to look forward to each day." Hattie reached out, placing her palm against his bearded cheek. "I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted. "It terrifies me and exhilarates me all at once. After Richard, I never thought I'd trust a man again, let alone love one. Brock turned his face to press a kiss into her palm. I'll spend every day proving myself worthy of that trust if you'll let me. You already have, Hattie whispered. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Hattie met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. His arms encircled her, strong and sure, and she melted against him, allowing herself to be vulnerable in a way she hadn't been for years. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Brock rested his forehead against hers. I have something for you, a Christmas gift, but I want you to have it now. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box, intricately carved with a pattern of roses. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a ring, a simple silver band with a small, perfect pearl. It was my mother's, Brock explained. My father gave it to her when they decided to come west together. He said pearls were like love created through time and patience, outlasting the creature that made them. It's beautiful, Hattie breathed. I'm not asking for promises, Brock said carefully, just possibilities. A chance to see if what we're building here could last beyond winter. Hattie took the ring, holding it up to the firelight. I think you know my answer already. I'd still like to hear it. She smiled, slipping the ring onto her finger. Yes, to possibilities, to chances, to us. He kissed her again, deeper this time, a promise of all that might come. When they finally parted, Hattie laughed softly. This isn't how I expected this Christmas to unfold when we took shelter in your barn. Life has a way of surprising us, Brock agreed. Speaking of surprises, wait until you see what I've made for the children. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, with sunlight turning the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds. Emma woke first, her excited squeals rousing the household as she discovered the small pile of presents beneath the tree. James toddled after his sister, eyes wide at the colorful packages. Hattie and Brock watched from the table, hands clasped, as the children tore into their gifts. Emma's delight at her new rag doll was eclipsed only by her reaction to Brock's creation, a perfect miniature of the cabin, complete with tiny furniture and removable roof. It's our house, she exclaimed, carefully arranging the wooden figures Brock had carved to represent each of them. Look, Mama. That's you and that's me and Jamie and Brock. It's wonderful, sweetheart, Hattie agreed, meeting Brock's eyes over the children's heads. For James, Brock had crafted a rocking horse, small enough for the toddler but sturdy enough to last for years. The boy's face lit up as Brock showed him how to rock back and forth, his chubby hands gripping the wooden mane. You've gone to so much trouble, Hattie said, touched by the care evident in each gift. It was no trouble, Brock replied. Best Christmas I can remember. After breakfast, bundled against the cold, they ventured outside. Brock showed Emma how to make snow angels while James, wrapped so thoroughly in blankets that he resembled a small, waddling bear, watched in fascination. When Emma asked to build a snowman, Brock lifted her onto his shoulders to place the head, her delighted laughter echoing across the silent landscape. Watching them, Hattie felt a contentment she hadn't known was possible. This man, this place, these moments they were knitting together the torn fabric of her life, creating something new and unexpectedly beautiful. That night, after the children were asleep, exhausted from their day of celebration, Brock and Hattie sat close together on the small sofa he'd moved near the fire. I have one more gift for you, he said, retrieving a package from behind a stack of books. Hattie unwrapped it to find a leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with her initials. It's lovely. I thought you might like to write down your stories, Brock explained. The ones you tell the children at bedtime, they're too good to be forgotten. Touched by his thoughtfulness, Hattie leaned in to kiss him. "Thank you for everything. This has been the most perfect Christmas." "First of many," Brock promised, drawing her closer. As January gave way to February, life at the cabin settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Brock taught Hattie how to shoot a rifle, just in case, he insisted, how to identify animal tracks in the snow, and how to predict weather changes by watching the sky. In return, Hattie introduced him to poetry, reading aloud from the books in his collection that had belonged to his mother, taught him to dance in the small space before the fire, and showed him how a gentle word could accomplish more with the children than the sternest command. Emma and James blossomed under the stable routine. Emma, in particular, formed a deep bond with Brock, following him around the property whenever weather permitted, soaking up his knowledge of animals and land like a sponge. James, not to be outdone, would toddle after them, determined to keep pace despite his shorter legs. One evening in late February, as a light snow fell outside, Brock cleared his throat nervously as they sat by the fire after the children were asleep. "I've been thinking," he began. "A dangerous pastime," Hattie teased, setting aside her mending. "Very funny." He took her hand, running his thumb over the pearl ring she now wore openly. "Spring will be here before we know it. We should talk about plans." Hattie's heart quickened. They had spoken of love, of possibilities, but not of concrete futures. "What sort of plans?" "Marriage plans," Brock said bluntly. "I love you, Hattie. I love those children like they're my own. I want to make this official, make us a real family." Joy bloomed in Hattie's chest, but caution tempered it. "Are you certain? It's a big step, taking on a ready-made family." "I've never been more certain of anything," Brock insisted, "but there's something else we need to discuss." His expression grew serious. "Those men you were running from, the ones your husband owed money to, they're still out there." The reminder of her past sent a chill through Hattie. "Yes, though with each passing month I hope they've forgotten about us." "Men like that don't forget debts," Brock said, echoing her own words from months ago. "But a married woman with a different name, living on a remote homestead, she'd be much harder to find than a widow traveling alone." "You're proposing as a protective measure?" Hattie asked, uncertain whether to be touched or offended. Brock's eyes widened. "No, God, no. I'm proposing because I love you and can't imagine my life without you in it. The protection is just an additional benefit." Hattie studied his face, seeing nothing but sincerity in his expression. "When would this marriage take place?" "As soon as the pass is clear enough for the circuit preacher to make it through. April, probably." He squeezed her hand. "Unless you need more time." "I don't need more time to know what I want," Hattie said softly. "Yes, Brock Sullivan, I'll marry you." His face lit up with such joy that Hattie felt her heart might burst. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that spoke of promises and futures and endless possibilities. "We should tell the children tomorrow," Hattie murmured when they finally broke apart. "Emma will be thrilled," Brock predicted. "She asked me last week if I was going to be her papa now." Hattie's eyebrows rose. "She did? What did you say?" "I told her that was up to her mama, but that nothing would make me happier." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I meant it, Hattie. I'll be the best father I can be to them." "You already are," she whispered, leaning in to kiss him again. The next morning, over breakfast, they shared their news with the children. Emma's reaction was everything Brock had predicted. She launched herself into his arms with a squeal of delight. "Does this mean we're staying forever?" she asked, her small face serious. "No more traveling?" "Yes, sweetheart," Hattie assured her. "This is our home now." James, though too young to fully understand, clapped his hands in response to his sister's excitement. "Bach," he declared, one of the few words in his limited vocabulary. "That's right, little man," Brock laughed, lifting the boy onto his knee. I'm going to be your pa." As March arrived, bringing with it the first tentative signs of spring, Brock began preparations for the wedding. He rode into town alone one day, returning with a proper wedding dress he'd ordered from the mercantile, simple but elegant, with pearl buttons that matched Hattie's ring. "Beatrice Whitman helped me choose it," he admitted. "She sends her congratulations, by the way. Said she always knew you weren't really my cousin." Hattie laughed, holding the dress against herself. "Did she now? And she doesn't mind. She said any woman who could tame Brock Sullivan deserved all the happiness in the world." He pulled Hattie close. "Little does she know I'm the lucky one." As the snow began to melt in earnest, revealing patches of muddy ground that promised eventual greenery, word came that the circuit preacher would be in Pine Creek the first Sunday in April. The entire town, it seemed, was buzzing with the news of their impending marriage. Gifts began arriving: preserves from neighboring farms, handmade quilts, offers to help with the spring planting. "I didn't realize we were such a topic of interest," Hattie commented one evening as they sorted through the latest deliveries. "People have been trying to see me settled for years," Brock explained. "They've probably placed bets on whether it would ever happen." The week before the wedding, Brock rode to the train station in the larger town 30 miles away. He returned with a surprise: a proper bed frame and mattress to replace the narrow cot they'd been using. "Figured we should start our married life with some comfort," he said, his cheeks flushing slightly as he helped the delivery men unload it. Hattie felt her own face heat at the implication. Though their kisses had grown increasingly passionate over the winter months, Brock had been unfailingly respectful of her boundaries and the presence of the children. But soon, there would be no need for such restraint. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Her marriage to Richard had never been one of passion or tenderness. What would it be like to be with a man who truly loved her? The night before they were to travel into town for the wedding, after the children were asleep, Hattie found Brock on the porch, staring at the stars. She joined him, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders. "Having second thoughts?" she asked lightly, though her heart constricted at the possibility. "Never," he replied immediately. "Just thinking about how much has changed since that stormy night you showed up in my barn. How empty this place was before you brought it to life." Hattie leaned against his solid warmth. "I was so afraid that night, not just of the storm but of everything, the future, the past catching up to us, failing my children. And now I'm only afraid of how much I love you," she admitted. "How completely my happiness depends on you." Brock turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I'll never give you cause to regret that love, Hattie. I swear it." "I know," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "That's what makes it so wonderfully terrifying." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of their union. They traveled to town early, the children scrubbed and dressed in their best clothes, Hattie's wedding dress carefully packed to avoid wrinkles. The small church was already filled with people when they arrived. It seemed the entire population of Pine Creek had turned out for the event. Beatrice Whitman took charge of Hattie and the children, whisking them away to the back room of the church to prepare. As she helped Hattie into her dress, she smiled warmly. "I've never seen Brock look at anyone the way he looks at you," she said, arranging Hattie's hair, "like you hung the moon and stars." "I never expected to find love again," Hattie admitted, "especially not like this." "The best things in life are usually unexpected," Beatrice replied sagely. "There, you look beautiful. Ready to become Mrs. Sullivan?" Emma, watching wide-eyed as her mother transformed into a bride, clapped her hands. "Mom as a princess." "Indeed she is," Beatrice agreed. "And you, Miss Emma, are the perfect flower girl. Remember what to do." Emma nodded solemnly, clutching her basket of wildflowers that George's wife had helped her gather. I walk in front and drop the flowers. Then I stand by Mama. Perfect. Beatrice adjusted James's little bow tie. And you, young man, will walk with your sister and hold the rings. Can you do that? James nodded, though Hattie suspected he understood little of what was happening. The small pillow with its carefully secured rings seemed enormous in his tiny hands. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion for Hattie. She would later remember fragments the look of awe on Brock's face as she walked down the aisle toward him. Emma solemnly dropping flowers one by one. James struggling to maintain his dignity with the ring pillow, the preacher's words binding them together as husband and wife. Most of all, she would remember the moment Brock slipped the simple gold band onto her finger to join her pearl ring, his voice steady as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her all the days of his life. And the kiss that followed, tender yet passionate, a promise of all that was to come. The celebration afterwards spilled out of the church and into the town square, where tables had been set up laden with food contributed by every household in Pine Creek. There was music and dancing, laughter and congratulations. Emma danced standing on Brock's boots, her face alight with joy, while James was passed from admiring woman to admiring woman, basking in the attention. As the sun began to set, Beatrice approached the newlyweds. "George and I will keep the children tonight," she announced. "Give you two some privacy for your wedding night." Hattie hesitated, never having been separated from her children overnight. "They'll be fine," Beatrice assured her. "My Sarah is thrilled to have playmates for the evening, and you deserve one night to yourselves before returning to parenthood." Before Hattie could protest further, Brock squeezed her hand. "It's very kind of you, Beatrice. If Hattie agrees, put that way, how could she refuse?" After many kisses and promises to her children, Hattie watched them depart hand in hand with Beatrice's daughter, James already half asleep against George's shoulder. "They'll be fine," Brock murmured, sensing her anxiety. "And we'll collect them first thing in the morning." They spent the night in the small hotel above the saloon, in a room Beatrice had prepared with fresh flowers and clean linens. Any nerves Hattie might have felt about their first night together as husband and wife dissolved under Brock's gentle, reverent touch. In his arms, she discovered what it meant to be truly loved, body and soul. Later, lying in the circle of his embrace as moonlight spilled through the window, Hattie traced the lines of his face with her fingertips. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For finding us in that barn. For lifting my children into your cabin and your heart." Brock caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Best decision I ever made, though I'm not sure who saved whom that night." The next morning, they collected the children and returned to the cabin, their home. As spring bloomed across the land, so too did their life together. Brock formally adopted Emma and James, giving them his name and his unconditional love. They planted the expanded garden Brock had envisioned, Hattie surprising herself with how quickly she took to growing things. Summer brought long, golden days of work and play. Brock taught Emma to ride Penny, the gentle mare proving the perfect mount for a beginning rider. James toddled after Hattie as she tended the garden, his vocabulary expanding daily. The cabin itself grew with them. Brock added 2 new rooms, giving the children their own bedroom and creating a proper kitchen where Hattie could work comfortably. In September, as the leaves began to turn, Hattie shared news that made Brock whoop with joy. She was expecting their child in the spring. The prospect of adding to their family filled the cabin with a fresh wave of anticipation and love. "You want a boy or a girl?" Brock asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Emma and James chase fireflies in the yard. "I don't care," Hattie replied honestly. "As long as it's healthy and has your eyes." Brock laughed, pulling her closer. My mother used to say children are like seeds. You plant them with love, water them with patience, and never know exactly what will bloom until they do. Your mother was a wise woman, Hattie murmured. She would have loved you, Brock said softly, almost as much as I do. As autumn deepened into winter, they prepared for Christmas once again, their first as a legal family. The cabin was filled with the sense of baking, the sounds of Emma's laughter as she helped decorate, and the patter of James's feet as he explored his expanding world. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after Brock had first declared his love, they gathered before the fire. Emma, now 5, read haltingly from a book of Christmas stories, proud of her new skill. James, 3 and full of energy, bounced between his parents, occasionally stopping to pat Hattie's still flat stomach where his future sibling grew. "Mama," Emma said suddenly, looking up from her book, "remember when we slept in the hay, before Brock found us?" Hattie nodded, surprised by the question. "I do, sweetheart. We were very cold and scared that night." Emma considered this, her small face serious. "But if we hadn't been in the hay, Brock wouldn't have found us, and then we wouldn't be a family." Brock reached over to ruffle her golden curls. "That's very true, Miss Emma. Sometimes the hardest journeys lead us exactly where we need to be." Later, as snow began to fall outside, blanketing their world in peaceful white, Brock and Hattie stood at the window, arms around each other. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Hattie leaned into his strength, watching the snow illuminate their land, the barn where he had found her children sleeping in the hay, the path he had carried them along to his cabin, the garden they had planted together, the future stretching before them filled with possibilities. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she answered, turning in his arms to kiss him properly. "This is just the beginning." And as they stood there, surrounded by the home they had built together, Hattie knew it was true. What had begun in desperation on a stormy night had blossomed into something beautiful, and enduring, a love strong enough to weather any storm. A family forged in kindness and commitment. A life rich with the promise of all the days to come. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering their tracks and transforming the landscape. But inside the cabin, warmed by fire and love, the future was as bright as the Christmas star Emma had placed atop their tree, a beacon of hope, guiding them home.